fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. You guys didn't think I was going to stop there, did you? We got Luke driving in the car. This is going to be a fun one. We're talking about suspending hard baits. So it's something we don't talk about a lot. Justin, you did a review pretty recently that got a lot of views and a lot of comments. And I think it's something everyone owns, little mirror dines or mirror deans, depending on who you are and what part of the country you come from. And they certainly work. I know, remember the last time, Luke, you and I used it. It was cold, so I don't think I've used one yet this year, to be honest with you. But, you know, it certainly has its purpose, and we absolutely destroyed the trout with it. I had treble hooks on at the time, and that was the last time I used a hard bait with treble hooks. I do remember that because it got on me. It almost got Otis, your dog. It literally got in my performance shirt and, like, ripped a massive hole, and I was like, I am taking all these stupid treble hooks off. But I digress. So we got Wyatt, Justin, and Luke in his truck. And we're going to spend the next however long it takes to talk about really when to use these and why. And then we'll talk about some, retrieval tips as well. Who wants to kick this bad boy off?
I can go ahead and
Wyatt, one of you two. Luke is going to do nothing but poo-poo on it because he's a soft plastic guy.
I'll go ahead and start off because they were one of the first baits that I found really heavy success with in the Carolinas. Fall and winter fishing is one of the best times to be fishing up there, and Mirrolures really excel in that type of environment. Traditionally, we use soft plastics to cover a lot of ground. They're a great bait for a lot of different scenarios, but I do believe they can be outperformed in cold weather months when fish get really lethargic, just because of the action and columns that they work. So the reason I think they excel is fish are a little bit slower in the wintertime. They have less calories that they're able to expend. Their metabolism is low because of those cold temperatures. And I think the focus of your presentation, knowing where the fish are, obviously, is a more vertical presentation than a horizontal one. So you're not trying to run lures past those fish's face really fast to entice them to chase it down because they don't have the energy to chase those baits down. Mirrolures and suspending plugs, all the lures we're talking about today, do a little bit more of a vertical presentation where you're twitching them and they, settle down from mid column down towards the bottom. Usually those fish are hanging towards the bottom. So working those baits in a way that lets it hang in the strike zone a little bit more when those fish don't have energy to chase stuff down. It's got that action as it wobbles down. I've done some underwater footage of Mirrolures. Even when you're not twitching, not moving them, they wobble. They've got like a little injured shad wobble to them as they go down. So I think they're just a great bait for just working a tight zone. If you've got heavy current, like I said, in the Carolinas, great place to be working those Mirrolures around points for trout because they work with the current. They've got that wobble as they drop. It's a different style of fishing. It's much more hands-off in terms of the retrieve other than just twitching it so it moves. But it's definitely geared more towards, these lures are geared more towards a cold water presentation. That's when I think they excel above soft plastics. Justin, I know you just did a review on them. You just reviewed a lot. Would you agree with that? Or do you think that they, are handy in other situations as well?
I think that I made mention in that review that I think it's kind of a dying art. I think people still do it. And you'll notice there's a handful of our members in our community that are diehard suspending plug users. I mean, sometimes they would reach for that over a soft plastic, even if there wasn't nuisance pinfish and pufferfish. And in most scenarios, I do think soft plastics have an edge. But this time of the year in the wintertime, I do start switching over to a whole variety of, I mean, this is just one hand. I got more in another box that I'm not using. I've collected so many, and it's kind of like, I don't know, like a lot of them work. We've kind of narrowed it down to the ones that we think are the best balance of price, performance, and everything on our shop page. Mirrolures being one of them. Rapala subwalks being another that, Luke, I know you really like, and every now and again you'll whip out. But the thing is, before I was even really big into soft plastics, before a lot of people were big into soft plastics, pre-2000s, hard baits were the way to go. And a lot of it was the trend and the applications of using jerk baits and paddle tails and swim baits. That culture hadn't really been developed yet. But the biggest reason I use hard baits is because I was a land-based fisherman for a long, long time, and I loved fishing for snook. And the one thing that I couldn't stand was when I would work a paddle tail, even on a jig head, and I'd work it against the edge of a dock, or I'd even work it off the beach, snook would go and swipe or strike at my lure, and I would not hook up to him. And I would lose my mind. Even with an exposed paddle tail on a jig head, I would work a whole variety of different lures pretty quickly in the summertime. And the only time I could get him to really like strike and stay connected was when I used like a lipless crankbait off the beach, or I used a Mirrolure. And in this case, I've swapped them all out, taking all the treble hooks off, like Joe said, because it's a pain in the butt. I mean, while it may give you a better chance to hook up, you're hooking yourself like probably just as much, if not more, and it's going to ruin the experience for you. But the Mirrolure or any suspending hard twitch bait has advantages of staying in a strike zone, not making contact with the bottom. So it's a bait fish that's constantly like right there mid-water column. And you have flash, you have vibration. It has things that a soft plastic doesn't have to it. So I think that there is a time and place to use this, and you bring life to this lure very differently than you do a paddle tail, for example. A paddle tail, you have a straight retrieve, the boot's kicking, and sometimes when you hop it and you twitch it, it'll kind of go up and down, maybe a little bit to the left and to the right. But the versatility of what you can do, I think, with a paddle tail might not rival what you can do with a suspending hard bait with the right kind of rod, with the right kind of line. There's a lot of little tweaks you can do to a hard bait that I don't know is completely available as soft plastics. I think the jerk bait might be debatable. I think the jerk bait will offer you some versatility, but then again, staying in that middle part of the water column, not keeping it at the surface and not making full contact with the bottom, you do kind of have to keep that soft plastic jerk bait on the move to stay mid-water column. So there's times when I'm leaning towards this time of the year, and in summer when I go for snook and I don't want to gamble on them swiping at it and missing it. That's when I'm going to go to a hard bait.
Luke, when you use hard baits?
Rarely ever. I'm a stats guy, and so I know that most of the feeding happens on the bottom, and so I want to, like, especially in wintertime, I want to get my fish, my lure on the bottom as much as possible, and for that reason, I don't use the suspending twitch baits very often. I'd rather go with the soft plastic. That way I can rig it weedless. And I fish a lot of grassy areas, so putting a lure with exposed hooks, especially treble hooks, it would be a mistake, or at least it would be a big hassle, because it'd be constantly fighting the weeds. When I do use them, though, I like the subwalk best, but I use it when there's just a lot of puffer fish. It's usually on a grass flat, and the puffer fish are just wrecking my soft plastic. So then I'll switch over to a twitch bait like that. And they're great, but it's only for the shallow waters. For like under 3 feet of water, it's generally what I do. If I'm fishing deeper water, I'll usually just use kind of lighten up on a soft plastic and just kind of flutter it down a little bit deeper and slower. But yeah, they're good lures. I don't want to say they're not good. I've just found better results doing the soft plastics and getting down right in the fish's face.
Yeah, I mean, and part of our role at Salt Strong is to help you find the fish and to simplify your tackle, right? Certainly you could go out and, gosh, I mean, just at Bass Pro Shops alone, they have an aisle just for jig heads, and then have an aisle, for just suspending, hard, the same kind of hard lures we're talking about here. And I mean, it's endless, just the amount of different styles and sizes and brands and colors. But at the same point, we're trying to simplify it and say, all right, if your goal is to go out there and find the fish, which is step number one, is putting you in the 90-10 zone, and then two, helping you just get strikes that anyone could do, even kids, in terms of a straight retrieve with a paddle tail. That's a big reason we talk about it. Because I met a guy recently who's been a follower of us for a long time, watches our videos. Like, man, he's like, I feel like all you guys do is soft plastics. And I was like, that's not all we do. But I was like, we're also trying to just keep it simple. And he's like, man, I completely get it. And he's like, that's what I used, to start. But he's like, when I'm covering ground, but I also like to have other things in my arsenal in case they're not hitting, or if it's, it's the winter time, which I think you guys are right, which is another reason we're filming this podcast now. This is definitely a more popular time. Who are the other big brands that have like some of the top selling suspending baits besides Mirrolure and Rapala or Rapala, depending on where you're from, once again? What are some other big ones?
So while not technically a hard bait, as suspending plug, Paul Brown Fat Boys, we actually carry them in the shop. They're soft, but they look exactly like a Mirrolure or a subwalk, and they perform exactly the same. The difference is the outside is like a gel silicone. It's actually pretty interesting. I like them a lot. I've caught a lot of nice trout on them, and they're a very popular bait here in Texas. They're known as corkies. But this, in terms of suspending plugs, I know of Rapala, Mirrolure. Justin, is there anything else coming to mind for you? Those are really
so many. I mean, I'm trying to think of like what I started to use versus what's available now. There was a twitch and wrap, Luke, that you remember. It was a balsa plug by Rapala. It didn't have any rattles in it. And I swear I'd go down to Fort Myers in the late spring, early summer. I remember fishing with Ty Nelson, and I was throwing paddle tails. I was throwing dark jerk baits. I was throwing all kinds of stuff. And he was throwing a Rapala twitch and wrap. And I was like, man, that's like an old classic lure. And he's like, just don't worry about it, sweetheart. Just sit back and watch. And he ended up schooling me on snook with that one lure. And from there on out, I started wondering, like, how do all these suspending hard twitch baits work? Why is he getting a reaction out of snook that we can see on this big sand flat that I couldn't get with a paddle tail, and even one that was looking pretty realistic? So Rapala makes a twitch and wrap. From there, I think a lot of guys, I mean, Jeff Page and Rick Murphy, they did the Redfish series for a long time. I remember them fishing around Palmasola, early 2000s, and just going to town on redfish on Seville stick shads. Seville stick shads used to be like $15, $20 lures. I mean, that was like the premier hard suspending twitch bait for many years. And it was just kind of like a tight, compact body, kind of like the Rapala twitch and wrap. And when you twitch it, it wouldn't like half barrel roll and give that shimmy or that shine like a Mirrodine would. It would actually dart to the left and the right when you would get just the right twitch out of it. So there really was an art to working it. I'd say the Seville stick shad was one that's been around for a long time that a lot of guys know. Some of the more new ones, or I guess the flashier ones, would be like a live target, which I don't see in a lot of places. They make kind of a hard suspending twitch bait. This is like a golden pilchard color. I know Yozuri makes like a 3D twitch and minnow right now. That's, kind of, I mean, they're all really similar to one another. Some have holographic foil, some have rattles, but in terms of body, they're all kind of, I don't know if I'd say diamond shaped. They're more like sardine shaped, pilchard shaped, whitebait shaped. They all kind of have that I don't really, what's another word for it? What's the shape, guys? I'm not great at geometry.
Bait fish.
Bait fish. Thank you, sir. Thank you. It's not long and slender like a hot dog or like a mullet, although they can also imitate mullet. I think they better imitate like a pilchard or a
apples, rocks, judges, a duck.
Just saying words.
You don't know what movie that's from?
What is that? I can't remember.
Why do you know?
Monty Python.
Oh
my gosh.
Yeah, they were doing the witch trial, and they were trying to name things that float. Apples, rocks, churches.
Yeah, pebbles.
Yeah, pebbles, very small rocks. Duck. Oh, I digress. Oh, all right. I apologize, Justin.
Yeah, I was gonna say, those Seville lures are great. I've used those over the years, and Yozuri, I got some of those, but they all work great. And the cool thing about them is they're very realistic. So I think when when the water's clear and the fish are really dialed into bait fish, that's probably when they excel the most.
A big thing for me is like, we think about soft plastics, again, horizontal presentation versus vertical presentation. We're in cold weather months now. We're in fall, we're in winter. And I know we're going to talk on retrieves in a second, but in those spring, summer months, or even early fall when it's warm, Luke, for example, you're going to feel out a grass flat. You're going to feel out all those potholes. You're going to feel out all those areas where it's pretty much a flat plane. And you're just fan casting, looking for those areas where those fish are going to stage up to ambush. When I pull out the Mirrolure, or when I pull out a twitching minnow or a Yozuri 3D minnow, any of those types of suspending plugs, I'm generally going to be looking at a depth change. I'm looking at some kind of hole in a creek bend. I'm looking at a depression in a flat that's, 20 by 20, just not very large areas, but it's a vertical depth change, not like, you're really needing to present to fish that are in those holes because they're cold, and you running a paddle tail over that hole is tough to really get strikes from because those fish don't have the energy to chase it out of a hole. They don't want to leave the hole. It's comfortable in there. So getting that, suspending plug in there, it flutters down in there. You give it a couple twitches. It stays in that hole. It stays in the strike zone. That's not very big. And like you said, looks very realistic. It's hard for those fish to turn it down because they don't have to expend a lot of effort to chase it down. It looks almost like a cold stunned bait fish. And I mean, Justin, I know that Mirrolure review you did, what was it, last week, 2 weeks ago, maybe at the time this podcast comes out. That was all in a redfish hole in a North Carolina creek that was the size of most people's living room. It's not a very big area. Those fish aren't chasing down paddle tails. I, in fact, tested paddle tails right next to the suspending plugs, and it was hard to generate those strikes because the action was much more subtle from the suspending twitch baits, and it hung in the strike zone so much longer. Those fish, didn't even have the energy to fight basically because they're so cold. So having just a really slow presentation, making it easy on them, seems like that's what really gets the strikes out of the suspending plugs versus the soft plastics.
Cool. Let's talk about retrieval and some tips that you guys have figured out to help, get more strikes. Because you mentioned it, Wyatt. I mean, part of winter is slowing things down. So this kind of forces you to do that because you're not going to just do a straight fast retrieve. So talk about some of your best tips. And Justin, you even mentioned with that Seville one about there was a certain method that would actually get the thing darting just right.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and start off first. There's really two ways to work a Mirrolure. And it's, I would say you're either doing it in heavy current areas or you're doing it in kind of the back channels where you're looking for reds and stuff like that. Really, I separate it by trout retrieves and redfish retrieves. So the biggest thing for me is first finding out where I'm about a foot off the bottom. Because as Luke said, he's right. Those fish are on the bottom. They're feeding on the bottom. That's where most of those strikes occur. But most of the predators that we're after inshore feed upward. Snook and trout specifically. Redfish will come up on top of lures, but their jaw hinges downward. A little bit different story, but it still works. So I try to keep it just off of the bottom, probably a foot, 2 foot max, so those fish can see it, have attention with it, but I'm still keeping it close to the bottom. So figuring out first, just by letting your lure settle down close to that zone. If you're snagging the bottom, don't let it sink as much. Start your retrieve earlier. And what it really is going to be is just you're hammering that twitch to the side. So it's a twitch, almost like you're working a topwater. Twitch, and then you let it flutter down. So there's going to be long pauses between your twitches to allow that lure. You visualize it fluttering back down, and then you twitch it back again. So I like to kind of put a slight angle upward on those twitches. So it brings that suspending plug back up vertically, gives it some space to flutter back down. If you twitch straight downward, it's going to make that suspending plug dive down towards the bottom. And sometimes if you're waiting too long, it'll just end up sitting there on the bottom. You want it to be fluttering. That's where you're going to get your strike. It's not going to happen during the twitch. It's almost always going to happen during that flutter down. So I like to angle twitch, almost kind of up towards my shoulder, not straight up, because then you're going to send it too high. Also a good chance those hooks are going to get tangled up in the line. So twitching it towards me, kind of towards my shoulder to bring that lure up a little bit and then let it settle back down. That's in those holes. That's in those back areas that there's not a whole lot of current. Generally, you're going to have the redfish and you're going to have some snooks sitting in those holes, and you'll be able to pull them out of there using that retrieve. The other way you can work Mirrolures that's a way more finessey, and it's really, I would say, exclusively reserved for areas like marsh creeks, tidal creeks, from Georgia all the way up to Virginia that have really heavy tidal flow. And this is you're throwing for speckled trout. You're going to throw it up current of a point, and you're literally not going to twitch it at all. All that you're going to do is let that really heavy current, those really heavy tide swings, bring that bait around that point, and you just need to take the slack out of your line by picking it up. But you don't want to move that lure, because what's going to you're basically simulating a small bait fish that's caught up in the current, getting moved around a point, and it's going to flash and wobble with that current. But if you twitch it, it's going to take it out of the natural path and direction the current's been bringing bait fish. And trout are going to hang in that current exactly where they need to have an easy ambush zone. So all you're doing is picking up the slack and allowing that lure to sit there and flutter, flutter, flutter. Now, if you find yourself hanging on bottom, obviously you need to give it some twitches upward so that it, comes up in the column, but you are not trying to put too much action in that lure if you're letting the current take it to where the fish are rather than working through a hole. So those are my 2 retrieves. Justin, does anything vary for how you tend to work them?
When I did that underwater video of watching the Mirrodine, there's a lot of things that I learned in watching a lure underwater that I didn't even realize. You kind of mentioned twitching the rod upward, and it's just 2 retrieves for me. You twitch the rod to the side, and how hard you twitch, whether it's like a fast twitch or it's almost like a drag, you'll get that lure to track in this direction. But when you start twitching that rod tip upward, the lure does twitch up and then pretty much slowly sink down and then twitch up. And you see how it's not covering as much area. That upward twitch of the rod kind of keeps it in the strike zone a little bit longer. And I didn't realize that. I mean, I kind of figured as much if I thought about it, but seeing it underwater, seeing the video was changed to now how I'm going to present that lure if I wanted to stay in the strike zone even longer. I think a lot of this for me, like when I'll work a Mirrodine or when I'll work a suspending hard bait, is around points where wind is kind of whipping its way around. In the wintertime, paddle tails are a great way to work points, right? But you're usually keeping paddle tails on the move around these windblown edges and shorelines. And throughout the rest of the year, when the water's warm or hot, mullet and other bait fish will whip around that edge. But in the wintertime, if we have a lot of wind, fish will still be waiting in ambush around that point, but they may not be as willing to chase down something that's constantly straight on the move. May not. I mean, every time is different, but if it's cold out and if I've got some wind, either I'm going to bounce bottom with a soft plastic or I'm going to twitch around that point. And Wyatt, when you and I went fishing, when you were here the other week, I lost a really big snook. I lost like a 28 or a 30-inch snook on a Mirrodine, and I didn't hook another snook of that size on any other lure the rest of the day, working a point. So I wondered if it was because I was able to stay in that zone a little bit longer and that fish was a little more willing to come over and strike at it, knowing the opportunity was there and a little bit longer. It's kind of a different train of thought. But for me, it's when I'm twitching, I'm suspending hard bait, I like to go with a little bit softer rods, but then again, I'm fishing these lures ideally not against heavier structure. Sometimes I do need to fish next to the mangroves and I'm giving a little bit on the reaction time of that rod if I'm fishing a softer, slower rod. But if I'm fishing open potholes for big trout, like in Palmasola here through the winter and early spring months, keeping a suspending lure over that pothole for a big trout, I kind of want a softer tipped rod for 2 reasons. And this is just for this application. I really wouldn't recommend a softer rod for most soft plastic applications or even top waters. But for this, I do it for 2 reasons. One, that slower delayed response and that softer tip in a rod, you're going to be able to get a little more nuanced movement out of a hard bait. So instead of a hard twitch like you would expect out of a soft plastic and a fast tipped rod, the slower rod, you're not going to get this twitch where the lure kind of like half barrel rolls on its side. You're going to get this response out of a hard bait where the lure kind of like seesaws. It goes down and up. So it twitches down and then up. And you really only get that when you have these softer, lighter, like twitches or drags, if you will. If you watch a Mirrolure or any hard bait underwater, if you twitch it too hard, it turns on its side or it almost completely barrel rolls and then goes back to its main position. But with a softer rod, those lighter twitches or even drags to the water, you're getting it to kind of nosedive down and then seesaw back a little bit. So the twitch is more back and forth as opposed to side. This is minute, but I do think that how these work to the water, if you've ever spent any time looking at pinfish in a grass flat and how they move, they're not so much barrel rolling. They're kind of moving up and down through the grass flats. So that's kind of what I'm trying to replicate, whether it's grass or even if there are pinfish up underneath the mangrove. I don't necessarily want it to keel. I want it to kind of go up and down and move in this fashion through the water column.
How long on average are you guys letting it suspend to sit there? I guess on your study, maybe a better question. Did you happen to time like the drop rate, per second or any of that stuff, Justin?
Yeah, for like a regular 17 MR Mirrolure, which is the one that's a slow suspending, it sinks about a foot every 2 seconds. Okay, or half a foot a second, whatever metric you want to use. And for me, I'm probably not letting it pause for more than 2 seconds for any period of time. Usually my it'll be like a twitch, pause, twitch, pause. So it's like 1 to 2 seconds is about the time I'll pause it for. The only time I'll let it pause for longer is if I'm fishing that 3 to 4 foot zone and I don't want to go over to the heavy model, which they do make a heavy model that sinks about a foot a second. So it sinks like twice as fast. But for the most part, like by pause 1 to 2 seconds, that's about good. After about a 3 second pause, I mean, I'm only really going to let it sit for a really, really long time if it's frigid out. If it is super cold and these fish do not want to move, and I know they're concentrated in a general area. But for the most part, 1 to 2 seconds.
One thing I will add, because that was in a pool, correct?
Yeah.
So one thing to add, because Chris Bush opened my eyes on this, Speckled Truth, which again, here in Texas and in Louisiana, suspending plugs are like a way of life here. Depending on the temperature of the water and the salinity, it drastically will increase or decrease the sink time. I do recommend when you get out there, literally just watch it when you're out in the water, because it will change each time. I've had my Paul Browns sink, in variance of, 1.5, 2 seconds, depending on temperature and where it is that I'm throwing it. So generally in salt water, it's going to sink a little bit slower. And if it's colder, I want to say that it sinks slightly slower as well. So as it gets colder, it'll take longer for it to reach down. Just watch it, I would say, when you get in the water, and know exactly the depths that you're covering. That's how I determine how long I let it suspend. I'm obviously going to twitch it faster when I'm fishing really shallow grass flats for, the reds or maybe some trout in 2 feet of water. Generally, I pull them out in 3 to 5 feet. And I would say on average, I'm waiting 2.5, 3 seconds. And depending on the model you're using, you might twitch it more or less. Like with my Paul Browns, my go-to is like, I'm working at like a top water for 3 or 4 seconds, and it brings it right back up to the top, and then it'll suspend down. So I'm working a V through this flat like that. So there's a couple of different ways to work them, but know that your objective and your goal is to get it up in the column and then back about a foot or 2 off the bottom. So that's how I would say determine how long you suspend it.
And just remember, the bite usually happens on the drop.
100%.
So keep it dropping. Drop it like a tide. Drop it like a tide. Yeah. Now you guys know that one, huh? Geez, don't know Monty Python? We're gonna have the long talk after this. It's gonna be a mandatory movie night over here at Salt Strong. So we talked about when, in terms of like times of year, you guys kind of touched on what types of areas. Can you spend a little bit more time on that in depths, and just as importantly, what type of areas not to use it? What are your thoughts?
Justin, I'll let you handle this one first, and then I'll follow.
Right now I'm using more suspending hard baits because I'm really targeting areas that have a lot of mud. I mean, for me personally, either mud or areas with sandy potholes. So I will fish them sometimes, Luke, around seagrass areas, but the caveat with that is floating grass, and just, it doesn't even matter if you go to a single inline hook, you're snagging grass. So a lot of times if I'm fishing the central east coast of Florida, or even up in the Northeast, like in Jacksonville or St. Augustine, where it's a little bit dirtier, you have a lot of winding marsh and you have a lot of mud bottom. And that's the type of areas that I'm going to aim to throw these suspending hard baits. And the reason is just to be able to stay in the strike zone a little bit longer and not make contact with bottom. And I keep thinking through this. So in the wintertime in particular, if we're talking about just right now, we'll talk about spring and summer and other stuff in a minute. If we're going to be relative to right now, I'm not throwing as many topwater plugs. I'm not working topwater as frequently because right now it's a little warm out, but we're going to get some cold fronts. We're going to get days in the 50s or days that just barely break 60 degrees. And he's like, a Fuss Floridian. If it's like 55 or below, we need a parka.
Wyatt will have a double mock turtleneck on.
Oh my gosh, the turtleneck! Please bring it back.
Yeah.
So
it's tough to pound White Claws when you're cold,
Do it in style. So for when it's cold out, I'm not running a topwater, but I still want the options for a hard bait. and I still want it to kind of stay towards the surface, but I'm slowing it down. So that's kind of my next go-to. And I mean, through other times of the year, Luke, you'll have times where a snook or even a redfish will come up and pop a topwater plug, and you're like, oh, they keep missing it. They keep missing it. And your initial go-to is to grab like Slam Shady Bomber, grab a paddle tail and run it through the same area. And that could work, or what could equally work as well if you don't have the floating grass issue, which you have in the centralized area that you're in, is to flip a hard bait out there because it's staying right below the surface. They're going to be a little more willing to commit to it, and you have more hooks exposed, just like on your topwater. You got 2 single inlines dancing around. But for me, it's mud. Like if I'm going to spend an area and I'm trying to paint the conditions. It's a Wednesday afternoon. It's beautiful. It's 62 degrees out and bluebird skies. Water's super low, and it's a little muddy, a little bit tannic. I can kind of see some fish. I can kind of see some mud plumes. What am I going to throw? Really just going to throw 2 things. One, I'm going to try to imitate either a marine worm or a shrimp, and I'm going to bounce bottom with a gold digger nub, or I'm going to work a suspending hard bait. And the reason I'm going to do that is because if they are keyed in on mud minnows, or if they are interested in eating a bait fish and I want a little bit of vibration, I want a little bit of flash, and I want it to stay in the strike zone and not make contact with bottom. Like if I'm in a little bit deeper water, 2 to 3 feet, that's when I'm going to go with a Mirrolure, because I can still stay somewhat visual. You know, if you're bouncing a soft plastic, I'm super visual wherever I'm fishing. So for anybody out there that, you know, if even fishing in the deeper marsh areas, a lot of times you're not going to see your Mirrolure, you're not going to see your paddle tail on a jig head. You're working 3, 4, 5, or even 6 feet of water. That's really just, I like the Mirrolure to stay mid-water column for trout, almost exclusively. But if you're fishing 2 to 3 feet of water and you can somewhat make out the bottom, I try to use whatever I can see my lure at all times. And that's my personal preference for me, whether I'm bouncing a soft plastic on bottom and I can see redfish or see trout and see snook, or I'm working a Mirrolure where I might not be able to see the bottom as well, but I can see how my lure is working in that mid part of the water column, and I don't have it all the way down near the bottom. Those are kind of the 2 different times and the areas that I would prefer to throw those type of lures.
Yeah, I would say my top 2 are going to be creek bends and the edges of flats, like right where it drops off. So if you're looking in any of those tidal creeks that are in Georgia all the way up to Virginia, anywhere where those creek bends happen and they occur, they're close to a big mud flat. Anywhere where deep water and shallow water are in close proximity, the bends and creeks generally have really heavy tidal flow that pushes a lot of sediment out. You get a deep hole that's created there. Again, as I said, we're working these holes and paddle tails kind of move through them really quickly. Having those suspending plugs that you can twitch through them, give that vertical presentation, you're gonna pull a lot of fish out of those holes. And it's just about going to each hole and feeling it out. You'll know quickly whether there's fish there or not. You don't have to make more than 4 or 5 casts because you are feeling through those areas really slowly. This is a scalpel type bait. It is not, we talk about baits that you cover a lot of ground with, baits that you finesse with. This is definitely falls into that class of baits that you're going to be very slowly working through an area with. So you don't need to make a ton of casts into each hole to find out whether there's fish there or not. They'll hit on the first 4 or 5. I would also say that if you're working the edges of those flats, right where it drops off, again, working right on that slope. So you've got, the big flat plane right here. You got your potholes, you got your seagrass, things like that. Those fish, when they're cold, they're going to sit in some of that deeper water. When they're ready to feed, they're going to move up to that middle zone. So I'm working that slope. So I'm going to, if I've got that slope straight out in front of me, I'm going to work that edge and let it come up, let it come down so I can get some of the fish that might have already moved shallow near this plane. Some of the fish that are coming up, I'm working right in the middle right there and just letting it kind of change depths. Those are the top 2 areas I'm going to use those baits. I don't really like using them in shallow water. I do think the soft plastics beat them there. If I'm working, a straight plane over a deeper flat that's, 4 or 5 feet, I do like, the corkies for those scenarios. But there's a lot of different baits you can use there. I would say that the top 2 areas you're going to want to definitely have those suspending plugs, those deep holes, those deep cuts and creeks, and those depth changes right off the edges of flats, and creek mouths. Again, I was talking about points earlier. Each creek mouth is just 2 points that are in close proximity to each other. So another great area to throw those suspending plugs for sure.
Cool. I'll say one area not to use them. Oh, go for it, Luke.
Yeah, I was going to focus on the not to use them aspect.
You're going to say docks, weren't you?
On grass flats.
No.
No, I was going to say they're fine at docks. Just be ready to lose some expensive lures when you get a bigger fish. But grass flats in particular are when their cons outweigh the pros, in my opinion, because in many cases, if you go a little bit too deep, you'll be snagging the grass. And in many cases, there's floating grass on the surface. That's going to be just a nightmare, because even if you go to inline hooks, which I do and I recommend doing for trebles, you're still going to get snagged a lot. And I would say the lure to test out with and compare contrast, as far as having a slow sinking lure that gets a lot of strikes during the cold, would be a power prawn on a weighted hook. That way it has a really slow drop. It has very similar action in the water, but you can rig it weedless. Most importantly for grass flats is you can actually scrape right on top of the grass, even go in the grass and pop it out just like a speared shrimp does naturally, and get some of the bigger fish. My average fish size has definitely gone up as I've focused on the power prawn specifically on weighted hooks during the winter for fishing grass flats. So I just wanted to make sure, and that's when my frustration is at its maximum when I'm using the suspending twitch baits. So I just wanted to make that point.
I was going to say docks just because we've had some epic days on wind protected docks in the winter. And unless you're able to skip well and get it down to the bottom, you're not going to really catch any fish. And unless you guys have some secret that I haven't figured out, it's tough, and it's almost impossible if you have treble hooks on there to skip these hard baits and not get them all twisted up and wrapped around your line. And of course, getting down to the bottom if there's any current. But that's where I would use a power prawn. Remember that one video, Luke, where it was the one that Nick dubbed you farting, catching all those redfish. I mean, we caught so many fish in just a handful of docks. They're all wind protected and was all using artificial shrimp. And that's where I would use power prawn and making sure it's down on the bottom, something you could skip. So that would be a time I would not use it. Any other scenarios we're missing?
I wouldn't be trying to skip them under mangroves either. Justin was playing with fire with that snook, and unfortunately, we didn't land it. I wouldn't say fishing it around any heavy structure at all.
Did it spit it, or did you actually lose your expensive?
No, I lost. Yeah.
It also hurts when you lose those.
I shed one tear, and then I'll whip out the other 20 that I have. So I'm not super concerned. But no, I don't skip them. I'll give you that. I'm not skipping them up under the docks. I didn't skip it up around that mangrove. That was around the edge of a point. That was on the outside edge. I have to make that fish come out and slam it. So I'll agree. Around structure, it's dicey. One, because, you don't want to cry over a broken lure. Nobody does. And two, you're going to deal with it snagging your line, or you're going to deal with it snagging structure. So, I mean, let me just say this. For those of you out there that are watching this, I do still believe, and I think you will agree, that there is an art to using suspending hard baits. There are many situations that soft plastics will be superior. And if we want to simplify it, the soft plastic, for the most part, will do everything that a hard bait will do. But there's times that you just want to throw it. There's times that I want to throw it. And I know some of you guys will feel the same way. There's times where I will lean towards throwing a certain model of a hard bait that I might not have thrown for a while, because I want to catch a fish on that lure. And I know that I can, given the right scenario. If you want to simplify it, soft plastics answer a lot of those questions. But I think for those times where you're going out and it's more about the experience, or it's about doing some niche things, staying in a strike zone without making contact with bottom, having flash, getting a certain response out of the aggressiveness or the softness of the twitch, there's a dance that goes along with this that's enjoyable to catch a fish out of because of the amount of effort put into doing it. But I'm sure, as you've heard from this whole podcast, it's a lot of work, right? It isn't as simple to go out and get them on it. But when you do get them, and I've hooked into some serious fish on suspending hard baits, when you do hook one and land one, it's so rewarding. I think because of the amount of effort gone behind doing it.
That's cool. All right. So each of you can only pick one suspending hard bait. That means one model and one color. Only get one for the rest of the year. What are you going to use?
Oh, thank God. It's only got 6 weeks, so I don't have to worry about just but 6 weeks now.
And next winter, my friend.
Oh, and next for a
the 12
year.
Either way, just pick one. Come on now. Unbelievable. Don't think about it too much.
Oh, I have to.
It's a very tough quote.
All right, Luke will go.
For me, it's an easy decision. For two reasons, and I'll just go ahead and say it. It's the Rapala Subwalk in the smaller version. I think it's the 09, if I remember right. And the olive green top, silver bottom. It casts further than other ones. It's a little bit more roundish, so it casts further. It comes with inline hooks too, which I really do not like trebles. I do mostly catch and release fishing. My dog's on the boat a lot, and trebles are just a liability for me and all the.
What, did you just hit something?
So subwalk is it by far.
Did you just run over something?
No, it was a big bump, a pothole.
Oh, pothole. Okay.
Should be throwing the suspending plug in there. It might be a snip.
Been suspending.
Yeah, for those of you listening, Luke literally just bumped up a couple inches in his truck.
I ran over some Mirrolures. I didn't like him anymore.
Ooh, I thought maybe it was a catfish.
Oh man. Okay. So we got to vote for Rapala Subwalk, which is unique. We didn't talk about that a whole lot, but we're going to talk about it more here in the next month or so. I will just stay classic. I will just go with the Mirrodine, dark green back, silver side. There's a lot of iterations, and I like the iterations that they make. I got like a honey color. I got all kinds of weird ones. But whether I'm fishing over open sand or I'm fishing over mud, or even if I'm fishing over a little bit of grass, I'll flirt with danger a little bit. I kind of like the contrast of the dark green back, where it's going to blend in with the bottom a little bit better, and a little bit of silver flash on the side. That if I were to keep it simple and just throw one, and I fish a lot of different types of bottoms, I travel all over to fish a bunch of different areas of Florida, this is probably the go-to that I'm going to throw.
That's what I have a couple of those in my bag. What do you got?
I was gonna see if I could pull up a picture of it, but I'm just gonna have to go. You know, now that I'm in Texas, I gotta jump on the bandwagon of those Corkies, man. I love them. Yeah, I mean, I fished them last because they were such a hot bait that was talked about last year, and I was like, I got to try these out. I went out not having too much expectations for them, and I love topwater fishing, and the way that I fish them, I basically fish them like a topwater underwater, and that's
what color? That color?
That's it right there. That's my color right there.
Explain it for the people listening. What purplish?
Yeah, so it's a purple with a chartreuse body and a orange neck. And that's the Pro Series. And I do prefer the Pro Series over the older series because there is a holographic foil on the side. And Justin, the one you held up, that MR17, I always would go with a broken glass side. Because when we talk about the action of that lure, it's a twitch and it's a wobble down. So having those scales, holographic foil, the broken glass sides, you're getting a bunch of this glint and a bunch of this flash. And I think it adds to that extra little just nuanced presentation as you're letting this lure settle down. So I like the flashy sides, but that color, I don't even know what it's called. It's like the purple back, chartreuse belly, orange neck. The other one that I like in dirty water, if I do
Nickelback?
No Nickelback here.
Don't ruin it.
The other one I like is that black back with the orange side. It just adds a little bit more contrast in dirty water. Those are my two color choices, but Corky Fat Boy is my go-to. It's just a gator trout whopper up here or down here.
Good stuff,
right,
guys.
Joe. You've been quiet. Stuff. I got to hear from you now.
No, I'm going to go with you. You know how I am. I literally just do whatever Luke tells me because he really keeps it pretty simple, and I tend to catch a lot of fish when I just copy him. But this is when I would copy you. That's what I've bought. That's what I keep in my bag and the times that I use them. That was what we used there, Luke and Placida, that time. That was when I had the treble. So now I think, do they make those, Justin, with single end lines? Are they?
They might. I don't think I've ever seen them, but I can't say they don't. They make packs for single hooks you can get, but I don't know if they make them like in the package ready to go.
I had to replace the last one, but I was hoping. It seems so weird they haven't made a version like that.
Yeah,
I don't think they have. But Joe, you're forgetting the time we were on the paddleboards fishing in the Keys when all those tarpon were around, and I had the most action with the subwalk, and you were throwing. I can't remember what you were throwing that day, but not the subwalk. Subbulk, they were fired up on that subbulk that day for some reason.
Yeah, I'm not forgetting that at all.
Fair enough.
Just not mentioning it.
Yeah.
Just picking at the scab.
Yeah, and who likes to catch big tarpon on the paddleboard? I mean, not me.
They're fun lures. It's definitely, I know I've poo-pooed on them a lot. I'm just trying to show a different angle, but I do believe that they are something that every angler should have at least a couple. Because even like me, I rarely use them, but when the puffer fish are bad, it's by far the best option for cold water fishing. So I will always have some in my tackle bag for that situation.
Yeah, or Gold Spoon as well. And Topwater, we do have some moonwalkers. A lot of you have been asking. They're officially en route or route, depending on where you're from. I've had 3 of those today, depending on where you're from. How do you say me? I won't even say the word. How do you say that name of the lure, Wyatt, in versus Justin? You know what I'm talking about.
Mirrodine.
Mirrodine.
You're just wrong, Justin. I'm sorry. You're just wrong.
I was going to kick off the podcast because I've heard both of you guys say it in your own unique way. And all right, let's hear it, Wyatt. How do you say it, Wyatt? And then Justin, you go next.
Mirrodine. D-I-N-E. D-I-N-E. You can't sound it out. English teacher would go with you, but
Mirrodine. Somebody Webster this, please.
It'd be 2 E's, but it's an I-N-E. You're wrong.
Mirrodine?
Oh, love it. Anyhow, we got moonwalkers on the way. We have most of these lures in our store. They're at fishstrong.com. And of course, if you're lucky enough to be an insider member, you get 20% off or more everything in the store. And we'll probably do a special on the moonwalkers. It'll be for members only in this first round. And we might even go higher than 20% off. So just one more reason to be an insider member. It pays to be a member. And of course, the ultimate thing is we help you find the fish fast and save you money on your tackle by one, simplifying and narrowing it down to 1 or 2 lures, not 50,000. And then 2, helping you, basically not helping you, showing you on the water how to use each and every one. So for you current members, thank you guys so much. You are the backbone and the foundation of our company. We praise you. We pray for you. And we literally talk about you every single meeting we have, just how we can better serve you. And thank you all so much who did that monster survey. We were blown away with how many responses we received and got some really, really cool feedback. So a lot of really exciting changes happening here in the first of the year. And I cannot wait for you insider members to see it. If you're not a member yet, what the heck are you waiting on? We have a 100%, actually a 200% money back guarantee right now. So you will find and catch more fish, and you will save money on your tackle, and you'll meet some friends as well in the community. And if that doesn't happen, you don't even pay. In fact, we'll even be willing to pay you if it wasted your time. So go join us at saltstrong.com. And Luke, I believe Luke's on his way over here. We're going to do some rod testing. Luke's got, what is that thing called, Justin? I guess Luke's back now, that we're putting up on the wall. What was the deflection chart for rods? Pretty fascinating. I saw it at Mudhole, and we've now got our own deflection chart. And tell everyone what that does, because that'll be a future, probably do a whole podcast on it.
Yeah, it's basically a chart that shows you can basically put 2 at a time on it and then put weight on the rod and the exact. And fortunately, as we talked in the prior podcast and tips, is that there's not a standardized model for the power ratings nor the action ratings. And so this is going to be a way that we can basically just help you weed through all the confusion and actually show which rods truly are a medium versus a medium heavy on the power side, and then fast versus extra fast on the action side. It's pretty cool. So I brought some rods with me, and I'm going to show there's actually some medium power fast action rods that have the same exact flex as a heavy power fast action rod from a different brand. That's how different it sometimes is. It like skips over 2 sizes, which is crazy. So pretty interesting, and this just shows it vividly.
So it exposes the ratings on your rod in a sentence. Luke kind of broke up. He must have been entering Polk County here when that happened. But yeah, that'll be really cool, and it'll be fun. Were you really entering Polk County, Luke? Look, he's freezing up again. Yeah, he's probably in Alachua or somewhere close by. Nope, we can't even hear you. Polk County. All right, guys. Anything else? Any good movie quotes? Anything good? I can't believe you guys haven't seen Monty. Have you ever seen Monty Python?
No, I'm still laughing at what my friend's trying to say is Love is Blind.
Love is Blind.
Still good.
Why have you seen Monty Python and the Search for the Holy Grail at all? Oh, you're on mute. You must be going through Polk County as well.
I've seen clips of it. I've not watched it in its entirety.
Oh boy.
Yeah, we watched it in history class because it's apparently one of those just classics, but it's it's really, really old. Not my genre.
Tell how interested you were
History
in it.
class, huh? All right. Well, we will have to do a screening
I wouldn't qualify that as.
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely history. That's what they did. I will fart at you a second time. I told him I already got one. No, he goes, I will fart in your general direction. All right, guys. We'll go on and on and on. But we appreciate you all. Thank you so much for all the love, all the support. And we will talk to you on the next episode. If you haven't already, make sure to go give us a subscribe on the iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you might be listening to this. And if it's on YouTube, obviously, please subscribe there. Make sure to join the club if you haven't already. And if you have any other thoughts or questions or certain suspending hard baits that you like to use that we didn't talk about, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, we will talk to you in the next one. Peace. We out. Whoop, whoop.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul, it was past